Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Would you please welcome Doug Lowenstein.
Good afternoon. You know, it may seem a little bit odd to have a panel here at a game developer creative community event of software publishers predominantly. Of course, Miyamoto is not a publisher per se, but I think the Academy deserves a lot of credit for recognizing the importance of the nexus between the creative community, of course, and the publishing community, because in a sense, while we've heard a lot over the last 2 days about that sort of uneasy relationship, even the love-hate relationship between publishers and the developer community, it is, for better or for worse, a marriage of necessity. And I think it's very valuable for the creative community and the publishing community to come together in ways like this to talk to each other outside of sort of the normal business relationship. So I think the Academy really deserves a lot of credit for having the foresight and vision to bring this panel together. It is my honor here to introduce a really extraordinarily distinguished panel of speakers to you, and I'm going to get right to that and then turn it over to them. Larry Probst is the chairman and CEO of Electronic Arts. Yeah, I've been in this business for 8 years with the IDSA, and I remember almost from the first day the refrain that I kept hearing from people in other companies, that is we want to be like EA. Well, I think that's sort of a testimony to Larry's leadership and the vision that he has and the reputation he has in this industry. I know Larry was chairman of the IDSA for 2 years, and it was really quite impressive because it happened to be the only 2 years in our history where there was absolutely no controversy over video game violence. So it really was an extraordinary, I think, testimony to the man's acute sense of timing, and I think it probably has something to do with his success at Electronic Arts. Brian Farrell is the chairman and chief executive officer of THQ, which is recognized by Inc. magazine and Fortune and Forbes magazine as one of the fastest growing companies in America, and certainly one of the fastest growing companies in our business. THQ has made, I think, acquiring and working with the development community a huge part of their business plan in the last few years, and I think recognizes how important it is to work closely with the creative community. Bruno Bonnell is the founder and chairman of Infogrames. I think it's fair to say that he's probably the face, if at least not the bald head, of publishing in at least Europe. And he is increasingly becoming a more visible presence here in the United States as Infogrames makes a huge push to become, in fact already has become, I think, a global economic power, publishing power. Satoru Iwata is the director and general manager of corporate planning at Nintendo. Prior to Nintendo, he was with HAL Laboratories, where he coordinated software development on the Kirby titles. He also was very involved in the Super Smash Bros. Franchise at Nintendo, and is widely regarded inside and outside the industry as one of the most influential directors at Nintendo today. Our last panelist, truly, if ever someone doesn't need an introduction, it is Miyamoto-san, and I don't know that there's anything I can say about him that you don't already know, so I will simply say our last panelist is Shigeru Miyamoto, perhaps the greatest, if not the greatest, game designer in the history of this industry. Our moderator... Our moderator this afternoon is Paul Provenzano. He's the president of the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, and I will let him take things from here.
Thanks. Thank you. The purpose of this panel today is to initially talk about the difference between global game audience, identify some of the ingredients necessary to succeed in each of those markets, and how we can actually converge these audiences. What I'd like to do is see this discussion go beyond localization, go beyond issues about different products in different countries, and actually let it expand into the discussion about how does a company function on a global level? How do we really address this giant community of game players? Hit titles have traditionally been localized in Japanese, French, German, Italian. What new audiences are becoming viable with the proliferation of consoles? And from a publisher's perspective, how big do these audiences have to be to warrant localization? I think some of the areas that come to my mind are Russia, even Portugal, and most definitely Korea. And Bruno, if we could start with you.
Yeah, obviously. Well, when you talk about localization, I think that it's not just a translation, it's not just a port of the existing material into another language. It has to do with the culture. And clearly, when we look at the global picture, we can state that the markets are different in terms of size, volumes, and culture. So you mentioned, for instance, the Korean market. It seems that everybody has discovered recently the Korean market on the PC because of this gaming center that are just mushrooming all around the country. But in fact, it's a specific type of game, and you can't expect all your PC title to be just sent over because there's supposed to be a big PC market over there. So it's definitely number one, a question of size of the market. And if you take specifically about Europe today, besides I would say the 5 leading territories, France, England, Germany, Spain, and Italy.
In that order?
Sorry?
In that order?
France definitely first. So besides those, the markets are a little small to really consider a full localization. So we're trying to address now in Europe, for instance, we try to investigate new ideas. One of the options we have on the PC side, fortunately not viable yet for the console, maybe on the Xbox, but not sure, is to try to organize the files of the text and of the voiceover so that we can download from some website, some local website, the translated language so that the people can actually play in Portuguese, Greek, or Turkish or Russian, or I mean, you name it. Actually, surprisingly, that started with the pirates. That started with some hackers. And Cities is somewhere here, but with Civilization 3, for instance, was available in German for virtually zero, because what we did, we shipped some of the product in English in Germany, and like almost overnight, a team of crazy fans of CF3 did for free like the whole localization of the machine of the game, and we're proposing on the website to download all this translation. So this idea was in our head. It's been in our head for a long time. I think we'll be pushing the idea of online localization in terms of languages for small territories. Now, talking now about the machines in the different territories, you just have to understand today that Europe is late on the PC penetration. German recession didn't help, and clearly we saw our numbers on the PC side in Germany really falling down to probably 40 to 50% of what it used to be. And that's not a good news, because the strongest PC market in Europe was the German market for a long time. So what we're trying to explain to the developers is that don't expect that the investment that we have to make to localize in different languages, specifically in Europe, will grow significantly the market share. Sometimes it's an investment to increase the awareness of your product, to actually invest for the next sequel of one of the title. It's not systematically the best interest of the publisher and the developer to be translated in certain territory in terms of money. It doesn't worth it in most of the cases for the small territories, and it's not a given that in France and Germany, for instance, now with the so-so market we're facing on the PC side of the world, that we can have a significant increase of the sales at this point in time.
Okay. Brian, THQ in the past, you have a history of taking titles both back and forth. I've seen THQ titles from Japan brought into the US and other markets. So my question is not only taking one title traditionally from, let's say, the US market and across the world, what are the criteria, and how do you approach localization issues?
Well, the first thing you have to do is understand what works in local markets. And that means having people on the ground in those territories. Bruno mentioned France, England, Germany, Australia. France first, of course, number one. Japan, some of the key territories, and have people there that understand what products will translate across borders, because not everything does. There's a lot of Japanese games that we pick up from Japan that we look at that just don't work well either in the US or in Europe, and there's some that work actually quite well. So the first thing is understanding the local markets that you're in and figuring out how you can do that in a way that works for the developer in that territory and works for us as a publisher. So local understanding, and back to what Bruno was saying a moment ago, is the most important thing, because if you don't understand the territory which you're selling into, okay, the target territory, if you don't have people on the ground there that understand what works in that, the right packaging, the proper voiceovers, the things that actually make the product work in addition to just the gameplay, if you don't have that local understanding, then trying to go across border just doesn't work.
Actually, with EA, in addition to having studios worldwide, I mean, what are the priorities that Electronic Arts makes in determining what is localized, where products originate?
We believe strongly in localization, and when we launch a new title, we may do that in up to 15 or 16 languages at one time simultaneously worldwide, same day. So that's a strategy that we have been working against for multiple years. We continue to push forward on that. Brian makes a good point. A lot of it has to do with the local teams on the ground in those territories, and they tend to be very, very vocal about needing the product localized for their particular market. Bruno mentioned Korea. We just fully localized 2 of our products for the launch of PlayStation 2 in Korea, and they're doing extremely well. So we will continue to do that. And you asked the question earlier, what's the number? And that tends to be a negotiation between our publishing people that are on the ground and the studio that actually has to do the work. And I would say that in our organization, if our publishing folks can't convince the studio that they can sell 25,000 units of a particular title in that territory, they're not going to get much support. But if they're willing to sign up to that kind of number, the studio will do the work, and the publishing people can execute against that. But localization is something that we believe in strongly, and we're going to continue to push on that front.
Right. Okay. Mr. Miyamoto, in designing products, in designing a title, what considerations do you make in the design stages, knowing that your title is going to go on a global level and in many, many places?
そうですね、まずローカライズそのもので言えば、我々最近なんですけども、日本語からまずフランス語が一番、それから英語を入れて5カ国、大体5カ国に対応するようになりました。で、僕たちすごく特殊な、日本語で最初に作るというのは非常に特殊な環境だと思います。
Well, in terms of localization, most recently, really, Nintendo has focused primarily on localizing into 5 languages: French first, and then English and other European languages.
でやっぱり日本語って文法が違いますから、僕らが作ったニュアンスがそのまま伝わるかとか、僕非常に分かりにくいギャグを書きますので、それがちゃんと英語で伝わってるかどうか非常に問題が多いです。
And we're kind of in a unique position because we do translate from Japanese into other languages, and in our games we do tend to put a lot of very Japanese jokes in the games that would not necessarily go over well elsewhere, and so it's very important to see that those are translated in a way that are understood for the local markets.
それから技術面では漢字を使いますから、面積は取るんですけど内容はたくさん入る。でそれに対してアルファベットっていうのは面積は取らないですけどたくさんの文字を使うという特徴があります。
Something else that's kind of interesting about Japanese is that because we generally tend to use kanji characters in the game text, the amount of memory required to include such a vast character set in the game is actually quite large compared to that of the English alphabet or the European used alphabets.
だから今言われたその趣旨として開発の視点で言えば最初に漢字からヨーロッパ語への変換、それから変換の開発ツール、そのあたりは非常に最近早めに準備するようになりました。
So recently we've gotten into the habit of preparing these particular tools for transferring things like these character sets into the character sets that will be used in the local regions, and preparing those tools early on in the development process.
けど内容に関しては今彼が翻訳手伝ってくれてるんですけど、実際彼はローカライズの僕らと一番親しく仕事をしてくれてる人で、まず英語に非常に正確に僕らの意図が全部伝わってるかを何度もやり取りしながら作ります。
And with regard to Mario and games like that, we work very closely together with our localization teams, and we'll oftentimes translate the text and review it and go back and forth and make changes to it. So it's really kind of a cooperative effort in a lot of ways.
でそのためにはゼルダやる場合なんかも彼がゼルダを全部クリアするまで仕事を始めないんですね。
And for the localization of Zelda, we instructed my translator to to actually finish the game before he even began playing it, because we think it's very important for the localization staff to fully understand the contents and the direction of the game before beginning their localization process.
でその段階が終わればあとは、その他のフランス語とかローカライズに入るんですけど、これは今ドイツでまとめて一箇所で、みんなにゲーム、これもちゃんとゲームを遊ぶ人がやるという条件でやってますから、非常にうちの場合時間がかかります。
And then after the game is translated into English is when we go and move over and begin the translation into French and the other languages of Europe. And we do that all in one place. We've got a centralized localization center in Germany. And again, those are also, the people localizing the games are also people who can play games and are able to get through and understand the content of the game.
ですごく時間がかかるので、やっぱりゲームのタイトル、ちっちゃい子供が遊ぶものに関してはよりたくさんの国にローカライズしますし、大人が遊ぶゲームはある程度英語で OK なものはもう英語のままで済ましたりもします。
And so because we do it in this fashion, it can actually take quite a while to fully localize games into all of the languages. And we found that the games that we design to be played by all ages, everyone from young kids to adults, that don't use as much text can be localized somewhat more quickly, whereas games that are more towards adults, we're finding that even in Japanese or in some of the other languages, we can just use basic English words to express certain parts of the game, and we can leave those as is.
最後にもう一回言いますけど、僕自身やっぱりオートマチカルにできないことが一番の悩みですね。オートマチックに自動的に翻訳していけないことが一番の悩みで、全部のスタッフがゲームを理解しないといけないということにものすごく僕らは時間を費やしています。
And so the one thing that I would like to emphasize is that we do spend a lot of time getting our staff up to the point where they fully understand the game and its concept. Because, I mean, you can't just automatically translate something if you don't know what it is that you're ultimately translating.
Mr. Iwata, what kind of considerations go into the discussion, let's say, of a product that's in Japan, and then the decision is made, this is a product that isn't leaving Japan, that localization probably is not going to be appropriate, that it's truly a Japanese game?
ゲームで表現できることっていうのが飛躍的に広がりましたんで、そのために、現実の文化に根ざしたもの、現実にあるものをシミュレートして作るようなものっていうのがゲームで表現できるようになって、それがまた非常にリアルになったんですね。でリアルになったからこそ魅力的になったんですが、リアルになったからこそ違う文化では受け付けなくなるんです。ですからどれだけ日本の文化に、日本独自の文化に根ざしているか、あるいは他国の独自の文化に根ざしているか、そこに本当に強く文化との関連が強くてですね、他の文化では受け入れられないものっていうのは、これはなかなかローカライズしても受け入れられにくいと思っています。
Well, as the expressive powers of games have increased, we find that there are things that we can create very realistically in games, and especially when you're trying to create games about things that exist in real life. Particularly, you'll see a lot of games that are made that really are based on cultures or events in real life that are particular to a specific culture. And the more realistic that these things get, the more difficult it is to really localize games like that for other markets. And so that's really where the challenge lies, I think.
例えば、 アメリカンフットボールのゲームはアメリカでは大変人気がありますけれども、アメリカンフットボールそのものの人気が日本やヨーロッパではアメリカのようにはありませんから、もうマーケットのサイズは格段に違ってしまうんですね。ファンは一定数はいますけれどもずっと少なくなります。逆に日本で非常にポピュラーなスタイルのロールプレイングゲームが必ずしもアメリカやヨーロッパでは売れない、あるいはヨーロッパで非常にポピュラーな F1 のゲームがアメリカや日本ではヨーロッパのようには売れないと、こういうものは純粋に文化に根ざした問題だと思います。
So to give some examples, American football games, which obviously are very popular in the United States, do not have as much popularity in territories like Europe and Japan. And while they do have their fans, clearly if you localize that game for those markets, you are really localizing into a very limited market segment that is going to buy those games. And likewise, if you were to take, say, a very hardcore, in-depth role-playing game, like a lot of Japanese gamers get really involved in, similarly, you can spend a lot of time localizing games like that for other markets, and yet again, you are really focused. That's really going to end up being focused for very niche markets within those regions. And likewise, the same can be said for F1 games, which are very popular in the European territories and not as popular in the United States and Japan.
当たり前の話ばっかりしてもつまらないんで、少し私の経験からお話をしますと、例えばポケモンというゲームは別に最初は世界を目指してデザインしたわけじゃないんですね。で現にポケモンが日本でヒットした後、じゃあこれをアメリカに持って行ってみようっていう話をしてた時に、アメリカの人もヨーロッパの人もキャラクターを見るなり、あ、こういう可愛いキャラクターは、アメリカやヨーロッパでは受け入れられないんだって私に強く言ってました。
But of course, for me to just sit here and tell you some really obvious things like this is going to be boring for the audience. So I think I'm going to try to talk a little bit from my own experience. When we were working on the Pokemon product, and in Japan we had created the Pokemon games, we really didn't create those games with the idea that they would be sold worldwide. But when we did move into the direction of localizing them, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not characters as cute as that looked like these would go over well in the United States and Europe. And a lot of people really didn't think that they would go over well.
で今からでは想像しにくいと思うんですけれども、その時にはピカチュウ、モンスターはですね、もっと怖い方がいい。だからピカチュウはこうもっと筋肉もりもりにするとか、怖くしようって言って、怖くしたピカチュウや筋肉もりもりのピカチュウの絵がアメリカから送られてきたこともあります。
And I'm sure that at this point, and seeing the success of Pokemon, it's very hard for people to imagine. But back then, as we were preparing for the localization, a lot of people said, Pikachu, the way that Pikachu is drawn in Japan is not really considered to be a monster in the United States, which is what the Pokemon were really thought to be, were kind of these monster-like creatures. And there was actually a period where the United States, in the US, people thinking about how to increase the appeal of Pokemon within the United States, actually had artists draw pictures of a much more monstrous, muscle-bound, fierce-looking Pikachu, and sent these back to Japan.
あれですよね。ピンクのこうカービィを出したら胃薬に似てるからって白に変えられたこともありましたよね。
そうですね。
And even when we were first working on Kirby, we were told that this pink little ball looked like some kind of stomach medicine, and so we had actually changed its color to white.
その時出した時ゲームボーイだったんですよ。
And that was back on the Game Boy.
Wow.
で、ただ結果的にピカチュウを世界的に受け入れられたわけで、その理由はそのキャラクターのデザインに合ったユニークで面白いゲームがついていたから、ちゃんとそれを分かるようにローカライズすれば受け入れてもらえるわけで、キャラクターが可愛いからとかキャラクターのデザインがどうだから受け入れられる受け入れられないっていうことが単純に決まらないっていう証明はここで一つできていると思います。
But in the end, Pikachu actually did go over very well in the United States with the original artwork. And I think what that really goes to prove is that it's very difficult to make decisions about whether or not a game is going to be accepted in a given market or not based on how the characters are drawn or what the characters' appearance is, what they look like. And that really the reason that Pokemon did so well was because there was very innovative gameplay and very fun game that was attached to these characters.
To turn that around for Western, American or European companies trying to enter into what is typically, or it's been notoriously fickle market, bringing these products into Japan, while there probably isn't a formula for making games that you know will succeed in Japan, I think it would be interesting to hear about some examples possibly about what to avoid in bringing games into Japan while we're talking about Japan. And if we can start, Larry, if you want to.
Sure. I think like the rest of the Western publishers, we have found the Japanese market to be very, very challenging. It's very tough to take product that was developed in the West and launch it successfully in Japan. We've had a couple of successes. We've taken our FIFA soccer game and fully localized it and got one of the star Japanese soccer players. We licensed Nakata and called the product Nakata Soccer in Japan. It did really, really well. SSX has done reasonably well in Japan also, but most of our catalog, it's a challenge to sell a significant number of units. I think the key there is to be able to either work with local talent or build your own development organization in Japan that understands the culture and understands how to build culturally appealing product. It's tough to do. It's tough for Western companies to hire world-class development talent in Japan. It's just a fact. So you have to be patient. You have to be committed to the long term, and it's a significant investment to build a development organization there that can create products that are going to be appealing to the Japanese consumer. We've been working at it for probably 15 years, and making slow but steady progress. But it's frustrating.
Was that some of the motivation? You have a partner in Japan.
Yes, yeah. we actually have mirror joint ventures with Square, where there's a joint venture in North America, there's a joint venture in Japan. But those are primarily distribution relationships. I wish that there was more collaboration on the development side, but there isn't. And if we could figure out a way to unlock that a little, that would be helpful. But it's frustrating, it's challenging, but it's something that we're going to continue to work at.
Brian?
Yeah, I think Larry hit the nail on the head. It's a very difficult market for Western publishers, and the real success we've had in Japan was actually made in Japan. It was our WWF product. We own a minority interest in a developer called Ukes, but that was committing to the long term, making an investment, forming a true partnership with a world-class developer in Japan. Yes, they do make a fundamentally U.S. product, the WWF, but on the other hand, they do localize it in their own market with language, voiceover, the whole bit, and then market it to the Japanese public as a Japanese product, which it is. And I think that's probably the reason it is successful, is it's perceived in Japan as a Japanese product. Interesting story, on the other hand, what doesn't work, which is part of your question, one of our top-selling original properties, a product called Red Faction, actually sold more units outside the U.S. than in the U.S., and the developer, we now own them, but at the time they were an external developer, and I remember the negotiation, they were pounding on the table about what we were going to do with the product in Japan. So we get down to the end of the product, and we're thinking about a Japanese launch, and our Japanese person says, well, okay, about the double byte code that you've put in so we can localize it for Japan. And the developer had, we're 2 years into the project and no double byte code. We almost had to rip it out to start over to get it localized for Japan. So here was somebody just pounding on the table about localizing it for Japan, and really we hadn't thought about all the issues in terms of getting it into Japan. So needless to say, that product was not launched in Japan. So that was probably our biggest challenge, is not from the beginning realizing that from a development standpoint, there are issues you got to hit head on at the beginning of the process. Forget content, which is probably the most important issue, but there's even just some technical things you got to hit up front.
Bruno?
Well, I think if you look at the games business being close to the music business, we shouldn't be surprised to fail or not to be competitive in some territories. I mean, here in this country, one of the biggest selling category in music is country music, as everybody knows. We don't even understand it in France. And I really wonder if it's just in terms of tune, pace, rhythm, if it's acceptable by other people around the globe. So for the games, I think that's exactly the same thing. The way I see the the Japanese market is, number one, very often, and it's obviously not a very nice comment, but it's advanced compared to the other market. I mean, the machines are arriving earlier. The information provided by the hardware manufacturers is accessible at an earlier stage than in the other territories. But that's the deal, and that's okay with that. That's why I believe that on the PC front, on the other hand, where the machines are more open, there is more of an equity into the technical challenge to create games. But it's just not a comment to complain about it. It's just a fact of life, and therefore the consumer is more educated on certain platform and expect much more. The only example I can give you of a success for a company in Japan was Alone in the Dark, and it's like 10 or 12 years ago. Since then we've been trying the same way Larry and Brian are commenting it, trying to break this market. But fact is, bottom line, probably critical innovation is the key, something that hasn't been seen before, really. And second, long-term investment in local teams is probably another way to do it, which is not probably satisfying for the team working outside Japan. So we don't have the answer to this market. We're just saying that as Infogram, what we decided to do, we've recently allocated some of our production, worldwide production dollars to specific Japanese and Asian development. And that's something new because we used to have only Europe and US as investment pools. So I can't really say what's the magic trick except innovation and more than innovation, critical innovation is one of the key to this market, which, by the way, is probably easier in terms of distribution that a lot of people think, but you just have to have the right product because there is no compromise with quality, detail, and innovation in this territory.
Now, this is actually either for Mr. Miyamoto or Mr. Iwata, because it's more of a development issue. How does game tuning come into play in terms of planning for a global or multi-territory product? I mean, beyond the basics of localization, is there a lot of consideration for tuning for particular regions?
パルのバージョンが、スーパー NS まではかなり処理が遅くなりますから 20%。それに対して僕らは全部プログラムを直してプレイヤーのスピードから全部直して同じ手応えが出るように努力してきたんですね。それが最近の高性能マシンになってそういう努力は割としなくても開発環境でそこを調整できるようになってきたことは非常に助かってますけど、その当時でもそのパルの処理のスピードが落ちることを構わずに普通にローカライズしてた会社もあったんですけど、我々はものすごくそこにこだわって今まで作ってきました。
Actually, up through the era of the Super NES, with the PAL versions of the games, we found that the processing power actually dropped by about 20%. And because of that, we would actually go back and retune the games to ensure that at that lower processing power, the speed of the play on screen, the response the player was getting from the control and whatnot was as finely tuned and gave the same feel to the gameplay that it had in the other markets that we had launched the game in. And now with the higher capabilities of the hardware systems, we don't run into that as much. And even back then, there were a lot of developers that would simply translate and not worry so much about the loss in processing power based on the PAL system. But I think now we're really more free in what we're able to do, and we don't have to pay as much attention to that.
What do you think the top 5 attributes or qualities about Zelda that made it the international product it is?
そうですね、僕自身が割とこう人間の生理に近いところでものづくりをするからあまり周辺にいろんな飾りをつけないんですね。でそれが結構幸いしてるのかなと思うんですけども、自分自身ではよくわからないですね。
You know, it's actually really hard for me to say. I mean, basically, when I'm designing games, I'm really designing to reach the core of the human person rather than really trying to. I mean, I'm really trying to reach emotions that really any human has. And I think, that's probably got to be the biggest thing why Zelda has really succeeded the way it has, is because it really has a lot of those basic intrinsic values that anyone can relate to. But it's really kind of hard for me to say, I think.
例えば親子の関係っていうのは国ごとにみんな文化が違うと思うんですよね。けど男女の関係っていうのは結構どの国も平等かと思います。男と女の関係っていうのは結構どの国も同じセンスを持ってると思うんですね。で僕は割と親子の関係みたいなのはストーリーの中であんまり使わないと思うんですけど、動物と自分とか女の子と自分男の子みたいなことは割と扱うんですね。
And to kind of give an example, I think you can look around the world in different countries, and you're going to see that the relationship between a child and a parent really does kind of vary based on the culture and the country. But to give an example of a relationship that wouldn't vary would be kind of the relationship between a man and a woman. I mean, that's kind of consistent around the world. Or, kind of the relationship you might have with a pet or an animal and yourself. And that remains fairly consistent, and you get fairly consistent reaction from those types of relationships from different countries around the world. And so really I try to kind of avoid, relying on relationships that do have those variables in different markets and focus more on the commonalities.
One of the questions I have concerns mature content. And since the various programs and the various policies in countries vary, how sensitive and when you start or consider development or publishing a title, how sensitive can you be to try to capture the whole world to those separate issues?
Probably the key market you have to think about with a mature rated product is Germany. We've all seen the issues that products have had there. They can be banned, even pre-sale. So at planning stage on something that has a chance of being rated mature, we actually have a focus group that looks at the German market, what we can do in the game design early on that we have to address in the early part of the process. For example, I don't want to bring up Red Faction again, but we actually did some things early on that allowed that product actually to sell pretty well in Germany, but it was doing it up front. I know some products are currently being banned in Australia, and you have to be sensitive to that, but at the end of the day, a good product is a good product, and we try not to make too many creative compromises to avoid a certain rating in a certain territory, because if you water down the product, that's what you end up with is a watered down product. And you look at what happens now in this isn't groundbreaking, but things like Grand Theft Auto are selling extremely well. People want to play those kinds of games, so you have to be sensitive to the ratings. But I remember when there was the thinking was Walmart was not going to carry mature rated products. Forget rest of the world, even here in this country, and we're well past that now. I think we have an excellent rating system as an industry, and we're going to put the right labels on our products and make the great products with some local sensitivity, but not to the extent of watering down the product.
Well, again, my comparison with music, it's like used to be a time when some of the lyrics of the Beatles couldn't be on the radio because they were considered as offensive. We were in the middle of a time now where some of the images, looking at the realistic graphics, or some of the words are considered as dangerous for people. I think that it's the classic story of the talent again. Everything can be expressed with talent, and it is your responsibility as developer, as producer, as designers. It is your responsibility to put anything you want in a game as long as you feel like it's appropriate. It's not gratuitous. It's not just to provoke a reaction or to get some press. There is some depth in what you're doing, so you can you can use any word, you can use any kind of unity, you can use any kind of violence, as long as there is talent behind this. And I think that it's definitely our responsibility to grow our business in any directions, from educational software up to major product, as long as we understand that we do have a responsibility towards the public. Now, from a publisher point of view, obviously, with the responsibility we have here, Larry, Brian, and myself, I think we're on the same page here. Yeah, we don't want to see our customers overreacting and we don't want to see our retailers, killing the lines and blocking the other people we're supporting in other genres and styles. So again, that's why I'm stressing the talent aspect of it. I think it's a debate that will, just disappear. No question that we have some responsibility. No question that we have to support any kind of software as long as there is some talent behind them.
Agree with both those comments. In terms of M-rated content, we don't publish a lot of M-rated content. That doesn't mean that we're adverse to doing that. And I think there are degrees of M. Frankly, I don't think Electronic Arts would have published Grand Theft Auto. Don Matrick, the guy that runs our worldwide studio, has made the comment that we should only publish products that if you were in your home and you had your family and friends there, you'd be proud to show them that product. And I think that's a pretty good guideline to use when we think about what's appropriate to publish and what's not appropriate to publish. And then in terms of localizing to a particular territory, we're very thoughtful about that. I mean, we have a product in the market now called Medal of Honor, which is essentially Saving Private Ryan, the video game. And in Germany, the product's pretty different. There are no swastikas on the German soldiers. So before we release any product on a global basis, we try to be as culturally sensitive as we can possibly be. I mean, we're not in the business to try to alienate consumers. We're in the business to entertain them.
Right. I mean, are there specific things that, and this can come from Nintendo as well, that Western companies typically have done that may have affected or insulted the local sensibilities? For instance, the use of three fingers on a character or whatever else. I mean, are we seeing less and less of that? Because it seems like there is a sensitivity. There's a much greater sensitivity than the past. An answer there?
私個人はですね、そういう意識はあまり持ったことはないです。むしろ、これどのゲームもそうだというつもりは全くありませんし、優れたゲームたくさんあるんですけれども、時々その西洋のゲームを遊んでいて、自分たちがこういうことができたっていうことを、伝えたいことばかりが前面に出てきていて、遊び手の側からゲームを見てないんじゃないかと思うことはありますけど、それはまるでゲーム遊んでるとブラウン管の向こうにこっちは見たくないのにムキムキのボディビルダーがポーズを決めているようなね、そんな感情がすることはたまにありますけど、ただ何か、文化的に侮辱されたとかですね、そんな意識を持つことはもうずっとないです。
It's actually been a long time since I personally have seen anything in a game that's really been kind of almost insulting or on a cultural level that was really not appropriate for the Japanese market. I think a lot of times the reason that many Western games don't do as well in the United States is that you kind of have. I've seen, and this isn't the case for all of them, but for some Western games, you do kind of have this idea that people are really creating the game for themselves and rather than for the end user. And at times, you do see these games that are almost like, this very muscular bodybuilder standing on stage in the spotlight, flexing his muscles, even though nobody really wants to look at him. and really, I think that the idea is that. You need to focus on the end user and create the game that the end user is going to enjoy and be able to take this kind of objective standpoint and view your game from somebody else's eyes. And I think that's where that's a very important point to take into consideration.
日本のマーケットが難しいっていうふうに皆さん感じられてるみたいなんですけど、日本のマーケットの一番の私の感覚の違いは、お客さんがプレイコントロールのですね、爪の甘さに対して非常に寛容しないっていうか、非常に厳しい目で見るんですね。だから少しでも遊んでてストレスを感じるとすぐこれはダメだって言ってしまうんです。それはひょっとしたら彼が、日本のお客さんを教育してしまったからかもしれませんけれど。
And actually, I mean, from the sounds of kind of the topic of this discussion and some of the sessions here at the conference, it sounds like a lot of people feel like the Japanese market is a very challenging place in which to introduce games. And really, I think probably one of the biggest challenges that exists there is the fact that the Japanese players look very, very closely at things like play control. And if they pick up a controller and if they play it, and even in the shortest amount of time, if they feel any kind of stress or they're at all unhappy with the play control of a game, they'll put it down and they won't play it. And I think maybe part of the problem is that Mr. Miyamoto has kind of trained them to demand very good play control.
Thank you.
I think I'll have to agree there. There's been, in the course of the discussions in the last 2 days, there's some talk about the future of online gaming. Can an online game be made for simultaneous world release? I mean, how doable is that?
Don't look at me.
Anyone?
I'll take a crack at that.
Okay.
I think it would be prohibitively expensive to launch an online game simultaneously in all the key markets around the world. It's prohibitively expensive to launch it in North America at the moment. But longer term, online gaming is going to become a reality. I think it's going to take longer than some of the current pundits are predicting. But it's going to be part of the business that we need to address going forward. Our strategy has been to launch in North America and then build out into some of the international territories if a game is successful. That's what we've done with Ultima Online, and it's been very successful over a 4-year period. That will be the strategy when we launch The Sims Online later this year. Start in North America. If it's successful, build out, try to localize it culturally as best we can, and the online environment gives you the opportunity to do that. So. I think it's a step process. I have a hard time imagining anybody launching, paying for the service to launch on a worldwide basis simultaneously. Good luck if they do it. I'm shorting that stock when they try it.
When you look at that, the online game is just fundamentally another type of game experience. You have all the same issues you have with localizing a different game. It's just a different way of delivering the game. So you have all the issues that you'd have in terms of cultural things, the presentation of the game, language, intonations, and just things that make it almost impossible, as you say, Larry. That's why we've, for example, we have an online football or soccer management game, up in Europe that we wouldn't think to bring here, just as our WWF game that's online here. We haven't taken to other markets because they're culturally just so different. So I think that you face the same issues with an online game that you face in the box product world.
I mean, is there any pressure as the latest generation of consoles and the coming broadband, usability in that regard, to attempt to do that? I mean, it's as difficult as it seems. Doesn't sound like it.
To me? No?
Sure, Bruno. I'd like to answer that.
No, I don't think there is any pressure. I think that everything was said. I mean, online could be seen as a feature to a game. So, secondly, it's interesting intellectually to release a worldwide online product, but with the 9-hour time difference between LA and Paris, for instance, you don't want to have people getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning to be able to play with their friend in Los Angeles. So it's not likely to happen. I don't know if there is really a demand for this. I think there is a...
Now you tell me.
More seriously, I think that we may, surprisingly, I don't know if the publishers are going to control the online phenomenon for some games. I mean, we're just about to release Tactical Ops, which is already a success online, and we know that with the local servers and the organization that we don't control, thousands of people are already playing those games without any control from the publishers. So what is interesting is to stimulate and give the tools and features where people can play and generate their own community, no matter where it is. in Europe or in the US, but as a publisher to have this kind of global launch worldwide of online gaming, we're not in anyway. So I don't really have any major comment on this one.
Is there any value in simultaneous launches?
Well, if you're talking about the packaged goods business, I think there's a huge advantage to shipping simultaneously. In a lot of cases, it'll prevent gray marketing into those territories if that's an issue. We just seem to get a lot of organizational leverage out of rallying around a title and getting the entire organization to support what's happening on a global basis and just making that a huge priority within the organization. So works for us.
And does it typically involve pretty diverse marketing strategies in terms of territory to territory, even though we're talking about this basically the same title?
Well, sure. I think what you want to try to do is build a product that's going to have global appeal, and then put in place localized marketing campaigns that appeal to that particular consumer. I mean, that's the strategy that we've worked with for many, many years, and we're constantly trying to refine that.
Yeah, I'd echo what Larry says. I mean, the way we market our products locally is our marketing managers in the various territories don't report to the corporate marketing people. They report up to the territories, and they're responsible for making sure the product is localized properly in their territory. So, yeah, the key is making sure that marketing person has the autonomy to do the things they need to do in that territory to make it happen. What we do that's a little different, yeah, sometimes a simultaneous worldwide launch will work for us. But sometimes if you have a very extensive, like in a role-playing game, very extensive translations to the various languages, we just don't hold the product. And on the other hand, sometimes when you do hold the product for a worldwide launch, it gives you that extra couple of months to tweak and tune the US version if that's the lead product. So it's just a balancing act. We don't have one formula. Sometimes we do global, sometimes we do a rolling launch. The one thing that I do want to mention that was back to your other point, Paul, about what territories we're looking at in terms of developing territories, and also with worldwide launches, is piracy. That's one of the things that we think about is what's going to happen with a title if we roll it out in the U.S. Will it be pirated to these local territories and actually hurt the sales of the products when they actually enter the territory on a legitimate basis?
When the discussions at Nintendo, particularly, let's say, for Pokemon, when you were discussing earlier, you touched on the perception of the image of a monster. But were there discussions of even changing the name of Pokemon and the various names of the characters? And how soon was that rejected?
ポケモンの名前に関してはですね、日本で使ってる名前をそのまま使ったキャラクターがごく一部いて、ピカチュウっていうのはその中の一つなんですね。ただ、もともと日本の、ポケモンの名前そのものが、日本人だから分かる意味を持った名前っていうものがすごく多かったんですね。いわばその名前は日本語であり日本の文化に依存してたんです。ですから大多数の名前はネイティブの人たちと相談を繰り返しながら、実際にローカライズをしました。で、ただピカチュウは世界中どこでもピカチュウにしようっていうことを決めて、声優さんの声もそのまま、名前もそのまま世界共通っていうふうにしただけなんです。
Actually, in the case of Pokemon, when you look at the names of the creatures of the Pokemon, the Pokemon that have common names in the US and in Japan are actually just a very small portion of the total number of characters in the franchise. And Pikachu is really the best example of that. I mean, a lot of the names that we used in Japan were derivatives of words that had meaning for Japanese people in Japanese, and that wouldn't translate well were they to be directly translated into English. They wouldn't have the same meaning that they would in the US. They wouldn't have the same meaning in the US that they would in Japan. And so for that reason, we did a lot of consultation with localization staff in the United States, and we had a lot of cooperation and discussion, and came up with ideas, changed ideas, and talked back and forth, and finally decided on the final set of names for all of the Pokemon. And in those conversations, we decided it would really be best for Pikachu and a few of the other characters to have a common name worldwide and to use the same voice actor worldwide for the cartoons. And so that was really how that localization process went about.
世界中の子どもたちがピカチュウって言葉を知ってて、それでコミュニケーションができたらちょっと面白いよねっていう話を当時ポケモンのクリエイターたちとした覚えがあります。
And I do recall that at the time, the creators of Pokemon thought that it would be really neat if every child around the world knew the name Pikachu and could talk to someone from another country should they meet and have this kind of commonality. And that was something they thought would be really neat.
Thank you.
そうですね。僕も長い間この仕事をしてるんですけども、やっぱりスーパーマリオっていう名前が全部ワールドワイドで使えたことはすごく幸せなことだと思うんですね。初めてドンキーコングという名前をアメリカで言った時にはみんなに笑われたんですけども、笑われる名前もちゃんとゲームが面白ければみんなが使うということが分かったんですね。
Yeah, as I'm sure you know, I've been in this industry for a long time, and I am very happy at this point in my career to know that the name Super Mario and that Mario is something that is known around the world. And it's funny because when we were first working on Donkey Kong, and we had proposed the name Donkey Kong for the title of the game, a lot of people at Nintendo of America laughed at me. But the fact of the matter is, I think we proved that even if you do have kind of a quirky name that doesn't necessarily make sense, if the gameplay is there and you've got a fun game, people will accept it. And I think nowadays Donkey Kong doesn't really sound weird.
でスーパーマリオの中でいくつかの名前をアメリカで変えたんですけど、それがあとシリーズを作るときにすごく不自由になった原因になっています。
And actually, in the Super Mario series, there were a few titles in the series where the names had been changed, character names in the series where the names had been changed in the U.S. And afterwards, kind of looking back, there were times where I kind of regretted that.
ですから今自分が次のタイトルを決めるときは世界中で商標調査をして全部の国でできるだけ共通で使える名前を見つけるまで名前を決めないんですね。
And so actually now when I'm working on new games and thinking up titles for games that we're going to be releasing, I actually get in contact with people in the local markets and tell them the ideas that we're floating about, and we have conversations early on to finalize a worldwide title name.
でちょっとおかしいぐらいなら我慢してくれってもう無理やり使ってもらいます。
And there are even times when, even if they say the title is kind of weird, I just kind of ask for their patience and say, come on, let's just go with this.
Very good.
名前が魅力的かどうかよりゲームが面白いかどうかの方がお客さんに認めてもらえるかどうかが多分大きく左右するんですよね。
And actually, I think really the customers are the ones that really make the decision, and rather than worrying about whether or not the title of a game is great, they really worry about the gameplay.
My question is, how significant were the decisions about acquiring or forming relationships with studios? How significant was geography in terms of trying to capture that global title and to continue to develop global hits? I think Bruno is a good example because you pretty much scattered the globe in your expansion.
Well, you know, when Infogram was founded in 1983, so almost 20 years, it was a small shop in a small town that Doug learned to appreciate, Lyon, France. And clearly with the vision that this market was going to be mass market and fairly big around the globe. And when we first explained our business plan to the banks, we did like 17 banks before getting one ready to accept our money to start the company. That's how everything started. So the vision is clearly that there is no money to be made and there is no significant growth to expect from local-only operations. It had to be global. So now, because we were a European company and we're not in this territory, in the US territory, we had probably no choice but trying to grow through acquisition here in this territory. So the decision was just a pure business one, where we saw that 40+% of the worldwide market was in the US. We needed to find, some operation here, and then the rest is negotiation and history. So I think that from a development and production point of view, don't forget I think that the point was clearly expressed, that our consumers, and that's probably one of the big originality of our business, is a global one, is a worldwide player. And it's probably like the music I mentioned before. There are some tunes that can be international. And the mission of companies like ours, I think, is to guarantee to the developers and to the people creating the product that we can efficiently expose and propose the product to the largest possible base of people around the globe. So I think there is I don't see in the future, my forecast is that we'll see major global company able to market and distribute games around the globe. Probably not so many, but hopefully hundreds, if not thousands, of production companies able to strike deals with those majors to expose their talent around the globe. So it's an interesting stage of the industry where companies have to decide if they go in a global perspective with more, operation around the planet, or if they focus on the product and the gameplay and strike deals with these major companies, but focus on the game when the other ones are more focusing on the marketing and the distribution of the product.
I mean, let's face it, there's talent around the world, there's talent around the country. You better exploit talent where talent exists. I said before, we have a minority interest in a studio in Japan. We have studios around the US, in Europe. I mean, you need, we don't look at geography when making the decision where we're going to invest dollars. It's, where's the best development talent? Where can we make the best games? So yeah, the publishing aspect, when you put on your publisher hat of, selling and marketing, there are some, global aspects of that, and you have to think about all these territories. But when we think about development, it's very different as where's the best talent? That's the only rule in our organization, where's the best talent?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think where we've been most successful working with remote talent is when we have either people there locally or people that are committed to spending lots of time with those development teams. It's really difficult to manage that process remotely, from 10 time zones away and 5,000 miles away. So I think it works best when you've got people in the organization, fairly senior people that are willing to make the commitment to be there, work with the teams, work with the creative talent, and invest their time in person.
Now, in the case of EA, I mean, this is beyond global development, but how important is it to EA to allow some of these studios to cultivate their individuality or their own, style or quirkiness?
I think that's fine. And if you visit our different studios around the world, they have pretty different looks. I mean, what you see in Vancouver is pretty different than what you see in Las Vegas or in the UK or in Orlando, Florida, or wherever you go. And that's okay. The way we talk about it in our organization is, we sort of have a value system that we run the company with, and as long as everybody's comfortable with the value system, it's fine to have your own individual culture in place in a particular location. That's fine, and we actually encourage that. If something's working, we don't try to break it.
Bruno, do you have? I just wondered about your attitude about the individual studios and how they develop their own kind of vision or approach.
Well, that's I don't think there is any conflict when you acquire a structure. Our attitude is quite often to try to integrate this culture within the studio within our own culture. Meaning that we had talked previously, we tried to explain what we want to do. We tried to explain what the vision is about, because we're not buying assets. We try to seduce people. That's the only job when you acquire a company that actually you have to sell yours first. And that's important to understand. Now, otherwise, we rather have commercial relationship with individuals or with studios where they want to develop their own, personality and their own style. So I think that being a publisher is a mix of both. We have about 800 people internally around the globe working. we collaborate with probably 2,000 more people. So I think there is a culture of infogram, there is a way of seeing where it's going, and there is the respect, and I think that's true for every publisher. There is a respect of individual structure, and as I was saying before, I think the market, the way I see it in the future, is this balance between, a limited number of major company able to distribute products around the globe, and hopefully, thousands of people able to run their own local structure and develop their own personality. I think that's one of the originality of this sector, like the music again. I like to take this comparison because it helps to understand what's happening in our business when you compare it to the music business, even though the production costs are different or the production problematic are different. The talent are revealed by individual with their own personality, and then they can be expressed and they can be distributed all around the globe with the major companies.
I think it's so seldom do we have the opportunity to have this particular group of people assemble together. I think what we should do now is open up questions.
At the beginning, you mentioned that there is a handful of territories which most likely get localizations, such as France. If we fast forward a couple years from now, and that pool has grown by a couple more countries who are the ones who always get the translations, which countries do you think those are?
My answer would be that on the console side of the business, that's going to be largely driven by the hardware companies and their decision to pursue a particular territory. So, most of the Asian markets, with the exception of Japan, have been largely ignored. I think Microsoft may be the catalyst to change that, because I think they're going to be more aggressive in those Asian territories, which will force Sony and Nintendo to follow suit. Same thing goes for South America, same thing goes for some of the Eastern European territories. I think it's largely driven by the hardware guys. Where they go, we will follow, and we'll follow fast.
I actually have a question related to that. Now, how much does the issue of piracy in a given territory play into the desire to go into that market?
It's just, it's something we spend a lot of time talking about, because the last thing you want is to have a product. We've had, and I'm sure, Larry and Bruno have had the same experience, and Nintendo as well, where sometimes your products actually precede your own marketing efforts into some territories. And that's problematic. And it is more prevalent in some of the territories we talked about. Eastern Europe, Asia, South America are really, piracy is actually rampant in those territories. Don't misunderstand. Publishers are losing money, but the development communities, we're all losing money together on these things. So that's one of the issues in some of these territories. I remember being in Southeast Asia once, seeing a product we'd not yet released there on the street there for under $1. So those are some of the issues that all of us are facing. It's not just the publishing community.
Okay.
I guess I have a general question about localizing humor in games. One story I've heard, for example, is that Zelda in Japan has many jokes in it, and in coming over into English, there are very few jokes, and that must make for a different tone of the game. I'd be interested to hear if anyone has any general comments about that.
そんなことあるんですよ。それもしそうだとするとビルの責任非常になぜおかしいのかという説明をして、いろんな違うネタに置き換えたり我々はいろいろしてますので、あまり僕の冗談が海外で通じてないんじゃなくて、ちゃんと別の冗談に置き換えられているので安心してください。
Actually, I don't really know if that's the case. I think that a lot of the Zelda games do get their jokes told, and we spend a lot of focus on making sure that happens. And if it doesn't, you can talk to my translator. But actually, apart from Mr. Miyamoto's answer, if you pay attention to, if you look at the game Paper Mario, I think it was a very good example of localization that was done extremely well, in which jokes that were told in Japanese that may not have gone over well in the United States were rewritten, and it's been hailed as a game that has very, very good humor in it.
Give an example of a Japanese joke that you decided to translate over.
I'm actually not a member of the panel. I'm just a translator.
Good answer.
But since you asked, in Japanese, Japanese has a lot of puns in the language that are based on the structure of the language, and where they take advantage of synonyms in Japanese that simply don't exist in English. And so something like that, obviously, it would be impossible to translate. But instead, you can try to find something in English that would convey the same style of feel, or find another way to write a pun for the same style of content. That's how you would try to do something like that.
Hi. We talked console games and PC games and some online games. I'm just wondering if the panel to give some opinion or the future of, say, wireless games are going to be on a handheld, like cell phones and things like that.
You know, I think that after like the call it the .com craze, everybody was looking for, you know, what's the next wave, and the hot stuff were the wireless activities. At this stage, my answer will be pretty much the same one that I had for the online gaming. At this stage, I think the technology is not right to be at the same time user-friendly, accessible, and reliable, to guarantee to the consumers that with a telephone they can play and they can enjoy, you know, playing something. The only handheld material that is, you know, definitely a success in terms of playing remains the Game Boy. So I'm not saying that in the future we won't have access to some other technologies, and some start to exist in Japan, some start to exist in France, for instance. But I do believe that the telephone remains a telephone for the time being. And we shouldn't, you know, creating game is like surfing. If you surfing on technology, if you behind the wave, you let it go and you miss the wave. If you in front of the wave, like the wireless, the wave is just crashing on your shoulders. We just need to be, you know, at the right time on the right wave. And that's exactly what I feel about wireless. It will happen, but right now we don't have the level of technology that the public wants to really build a real business model. That would be our strategy at this point. Just for information, we spent about $5 million in this last year that I just wrote off my books. So
I've seen a lot of money being spent in this area. I was just curious.
一応日本はその携帯電話でですね、ゲームのビジネスがそれなりに成功していると報道されているようなので、ちょっとそのことについてお話ししておきます。確かに日本でいろんなiモードというサービスが特に大変普及して、これで今はゲームを遊ぶサービスも存在してるんですね。で、ただ実際に毎月お金を払ってゲームをしている人の数はそんなに多くはありません。いなくはないですけど。ですからその i モードのユーザー全員が今毎月お金払ってゲームをしているわけじゃないんです。
Well, since Japan has seen the development of some platforms that might make wireless gaming possible, particularly I think i-mode is something that's arisen in Japan that we can all relate to and understand. I'll talk about that a little bit. It's true that you do have wireless gaming going on in Japan, and there are people playing it. But the fact of the matter is, the number of i-mode users who are paying monthly fees to go wireless and play games on their cell phones is very, very low. There are people doing it. It's not like there aren't any, but it's not a large number.
で、NTT ドコモというその Y モードを展開しているキャリアがコンテンツ量の 9% しか通信会社は取りませんって言ってるんで、これほとんどみんな騙されてるんですけど、ここはコンテンツを作る人たちのコミュニティなのであえて言いますけれども、それは毎月払うサブスクリプションフィーからのお金は 9% しか取りませんって言ってるだけで、ゲームをやることによって増える通信費のお金は一切ゲーム屋さんに来ません。
And the NTT Docomo, which is the developer of i-mode in Japan, has been telling people that they are only taking 9% of the fees associated with wireless gaming. And since we're in a room of people who are game developers, I think I am free to say this. They've actually been fooling a lot of people because it's true that they only take 9% of the monthly fee that is charged for those gaming services. But they are the only ones that are receiving money for the increased usage of the cell phones. None of that money is going back to game designers.
私の友達でその携帯電話のゲームで月に何万円もお金を使ったっていう人がいますけれど、その人が払ったお金のうちそのゲームコンテンツを作った人たちのところに行っているのは300円以下です。
So I actually have acquaintances in Japan who have, spent hundreds of dollars in a month on this wireless gaming through their cell phones. But of those hundreds of dollars, the amount of money that actually went to the game developers was really roughly about $3.
ですから実際そのゲームコンテンツを作る人たちにとってプロフィタブルなビジネスモデルは現状では存在してないです。あの世界に行けばビジネスはキャリアのものです。我々のものではありません。
So really, in terms of a business model, there is no model in existence right now that is sustainable for the creator of game contents. I mean, we may get to a point, but at this point, the majority of the money is going to the provider of the telephone lines.
And I was always curious about the lack of ability of companies to bring new genres of gameplay. I've so often seen a genre of gameplay start in a foreign country, and yet nobody would license it, nobody would start to develop that market. Only recently, say, have the rhythm games like Dance Dance Revolution and Guitar Freaks started to make an impact in the United States. I was wondering if anybody had any insight as to the reluctance of companies to break these genres, even if they were internally developed and the cost of localization would be very low.
What's the question?
Well, we're always looking for new content, and it's a balance, like anything else. It's there are expenses. Even if the game development cost is low, is to your point, to crack a market or break a market, takes resources of people, money, whatever. We're always looking for new types of games, something that's not just Me Too or. But at the same time, if you're really going to get behind a product, you got to be able to convince. I think it was Mr. Iwata that said a moment ago, or maybe it was Mr. Miyamoto. What do people want to play? What does our market want to play? That is the question we have to ask ourselves. Not, there are some great films, great music that tends to be just have a limited appeal, and as a commercial publisher. Artistically it may be great, but if we can't make money on it, I mean, that's what my job and livelihood is depending on. So, yeah, artistically we may love something, and we are looking for what could be that next great thing, but you've got to look to see, is there a market for that? Do people want that product?
I think the other, within our organization, in order to break something new, there really needs to be a creative champion within the organization, and it needs to be a fairly credible person, a person with a track record and some experience and some success in their background. Because the cost of development these days, I mean, the reality is the cost of development is just staggering, and it continues to go up and continues to escalate, and that trend is that's not going to change. And when we're averagely spending $5 million on a new PlayStation 2 game, or $10 million or $20 million on something, we got to be pretty sure that there's going to be some commercial success attached to that. But we're constantly looking for something that's new and exciting and different and fresh, and we're willing to take creative chances. I mean, we did that with Majestic. Didn't work, but and we spent a lot of money against that, but we tried, and we'll try again.
This is the last question. Lauren?
You touched on something earlier regarding the three-fingered characters in Japan. And we ourselves sort of found this out the hard way. But I think a lot of Western designers don't really understand that cultural issue, especially since Disney sort of set a trend for us many years ago with four-fingered characters. And so for Western designers, hoping to penetrate the Japanese market, when we encountered the four-finger problem, cultural problem, it seemed like this might be something that's changing, that's sort of aging out with certain generations of the Japanese people. Is it something that you see changing, or is it something that's that we have to be aware of as we continue to possibly penetrate that market?
僕自身もですねディズニーのファンで、4本の指でよく絵を描いてたんですね。ところがやっぱり日本のいろんな団体からそういうことを教えてもらいまして、それ以降は僕自身は人間のキャラクター、ドンキーコングも一応人間にかなり近いので、5本にしてます。これは僕はあまり意味がないと思うんですけど、やっぱりそれによって傷つく人がいるということで、配慮しないとしょうがないと考えて今はやってます。でそれ以外の人型じゃないクリーチャーに関してはもう日本でもピクミンなんか3本だと思いますから、これは自由に作ってますけど、やっぱりそういう国独特の文化っていうのは教えてもらえないと分からないことはありますね。
Well, yeah, I mean, I've actually been a fan of Disney characters for quite a while, and when I was first getting started, I actually had thought about doing going with 4 fingers on some of my characters as well, until people had said that wasn't a good idea, and really I mean, if you look at Donkey Kong has 5 fingers because Donkey Kong is really close to human and almost human. And so for really all my human characters now, I do have 5 fingers, and that's what we go with. But if you look at, say, like Pikmin, there's only 3. So, I mean, and it can be hard for countries. If you don't have somebody who can tell you that kind of thing and kind of advise you as to what the cultural significances are in different countries, it can be difficult.
Do you see that changing, or do you see it something that we should account for from here on?
そのうちそういうものは消えていくとは思うんですけどね。けど当分続くでしょうね。でも僕らは最初からそういうことを基本に作ってます。それからもう一つ僕は西洋のゲームが東洋を扱った時にもうごちゃ混ぜに使ってすごくおかしなこととかをよく見てるので、海外の西洋のゲームが東洋の素材を扱った時にいろんな国が混ざっていろんな、変な東洋をよく書くので、僕自身も西洋を書く時とかには特に宗教に関しては一切扱わないようにしてます。
Well, yeah, I think it's possible that over time those things could go away and we wouldn't have to worry about them as much. But I think for the time being, it is something to take into consideration. And on the other hand, on the other side of things, you do see sometimes when Western games in their games represent Eastern cultures and whatnot, you see kind of these strange mixtures of things and a mishmash that doesn't necessarily represent a specific culture, but really a mishmash of what Westerners kind of understand as being Eastern. And so likewise in my games, when thinking of developing games and going worldwide with them, I usually try to avoid issues like religion and whatnot so that we don't have that same kind of mishmash of ideas going on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our time is up, and I want to thank this very, very great panel of very interesting people. Thank you. Yes, get out of here. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Larry.